karma? What about rebirth? What about this? What about that? They want to go back to those areas that kind of need them.
Well, sure, but that because you brought the baggage of the term Buddhism.
Yeah.
You could, and this was great, and I really appreciate it, but you could have presented everything without mentioning the term Buddhism at all. That was sort of invalid.
You could have, but you want to go practical, but it sounds like Buddhism. I want to give credit to the area from which it came and be upfront that that's, the stuff that's coming out of that. I don't do anything that's accepted. But that's kind of the notion I'm trying to get across, is that all of this stuff, if it works, it works, and it's a good idea, it's a good idea, and if the perspective is consistent with what our modern scientific view seems to reveal about the way nature works, that those, to that extent, are good ideas. And that's kind of my point, is we can separate that out. But a lot of times people go so focused on, well, this comes out of this religion thing, and I heard that these guys were in league with the Chinese government. All this different other stuff comes in, and so they never actually explore some of the, really like this practice.
When you were talking then about the aggregates, it made me think, maybe this is not what you were saying, but it's kind of like then, because on every word, it's like letting out that paper, the lesson is made out of like, well, that plant is made out of something that decomposes, and then it comes back perhaps, and in that kind of plant again, because the minerals or whatever that it had comes back as something else. That plant and I just in this building is going out somewhere. So
just recently I read a thing talking about there's a man and he's feeling weak or something, needs something to support himself with. He stands up against a tree to support himself, so the tree's giving him support. And he has a heart attack, he dies there, decomposes. Now the tree's getting support from him. That thing was in there. And what's great about that is that what you have to understand, this was good. I couldn't really get into a lot of this detail here, is that there's a certain sort of way you go about looking at ancient philosophies if you're going to try to distill anything of value from it. And the way you have to do it is you have to understand first and foremost that the phrasing of things can cause a lot of different connotations to people's minds. Like I said, defilements sounds like fetins that a Scientologist would talk about. Makes you go, well, that's BS. But you have to kind of get behind that and say, what are they looking at? And the supernaturalism as it exists today, it's almost kind of a sci-fi concept. There's different dimensions of existence and different planes of existence, things like that. The way we think of it today, a big bulk of that was invented in the 2nd century AD. And certainly Platonism, the concept of ideal forms, was an influence to that conception of supernatural. But that was basically a response to the fact that Jesus didn't come back. So that the kingdom of heaven in this other realm. Those ideas about supernaturalism, when you look at ancient philosophies, whether it's Western Stoicism or Epicureanism or Socrates or Eastern Buddhism, are happening in a pre-supernatural setting. A setting before those concepts sort of gel together. So when these guys are talking about this is how life works, this is how people work, this is what a person is, this is what life and death are, they're talking about the natural world. And what happens is that they use certain terms. When Socrates is talking about the soul, or especially when Stoics are talking about the soul, they're talking about whatever the physical, material aspects are that make something move as opposed to something being still. They're basically throwing out theories. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? And they're not talking about some ghost. They're talking about something that they would view as like a gas or particles that animate things. And so what happens is they use these certain words like soul, but then later those words get co-opted by Christianity and the supernaturalists. So now when we look back on this earlier stuff, and we hear soul, and we hear Atma, and we hear this language, we're thinking about it through a Christian lens, through a Christian filter. And it makes us think that it's a lot more mystical than it really was. And what they're talking about really is a lot more akin to what modern complex systems theorists in biology. When Heraclitus said you can't step twice into the same river because it's not the same river, it's not the same man. That's autopoiesis. That's where you have the same complex system, but all of its atoms have been replaced over time. I don't know who this is.
Can you think about any ethics about helping the more unfortunate, the more downtrodden, whatever the other current religions are or aren't? There's a lot of things that aren't. They do try and help the poor and this and that and the other thing. Maybe under the guise of the way we don't see things, but they do. But I've attended other lectures on Buddha, and I have yet to see anything about helping the downtrodden, but of course I don't know much about it, which is the reason I'm asking you.
Yeah, that would be a matter of what the current sociological structures are and historical structure of how people behave. This is really just talking about core ideas. And you do hear Buddhists talking about compassion and loving kindness. That's a very, very central thing in Buddhism. And one would hope that if somebody practiced that, they would be compassionate in Buddhist. And I'm sure that anywhere you find Buddhists doing good things, that's why they're doing it. Thinking about it in those terms. As far as how many people follow through with their teachings and there, that's probably more of a sociological issue.
Most Buddhists, I've seen lots of them in different countries of the Far East, are very impressive. But I went to a couple of lectures in the Heights. They have a Buddhist private home there where they have local Buddhists who are gathering there, and they have instruction, and they get together. It's about 4 blocks north of the freeway, number 10. I'm sure we could find you something. People would come in and kneel and semi-kneel to this little Buddha. I've never knelt to anything. This small Buddha was, to put it as graceful as I can, a small, highly unesthetic, small figure with a disproportionate abdomen and a broad face, and to come in and see all these people coming down the aisle and semi-kneeling was to me a very unesthetic experience. Did the Buddha change from country to country? And why is this unesthetic in contrast to all over the world where those figures were mind-blowing? Where does that come from?
Okay. First of all, as far as the giving, and I thought where you were going with that was that they were in here doing this practice, but they weren't out helping people. And what I'd like to say about that, though, is that all of us face that challenge. How many cans we bought today for parking drive? That's something that happens. But also in Buddhism, there's this concept of the bodhisattva, and these are people who have their own enlightenment. In other words, in philosophy, there's this concept of, do I work on myself, the person in the mirror, or do I get out there and try to fix the world? And I imagine that will probably touch on the lower way and the balance aspect. But bodhisattvas are people who said they're going to delay their own enlightenment to go out and other people will become better off. So I think all philosophies and religions face that kind of dual balance issue there. As far as the anesthetic of the kneeling, when we see kneeling like that, we're thinking of subjugation and, to a God and master, something like what Muslims may submit, so they get down and that, and Christians send them. But of course, Buddha is not their God, and they don't worship idols. And what that means is that I was at a Buddhist temple and I asked one of the monks about this process of coming in and bow to the statue. He says, that's just a piece of wood. That's just a piece of wood. It's meaningless. The reason we bow to it isn't to do anything to it. It isn't to give anything to it. We do that because of what it does here, what it does to us. And it's a way of refocusing your attention. So you know you come into the temple, you're either going to hear some kind of like teachings or you're going to practice some meditation or whatever. The point is, you've got all this stuff about did I do my taxes right, did I do, what's going on in my life and all that. You need to like wipe that away, clear off the desktop, refocus on this now. So it's a physical act that's supposed to have this psychological effect of refocusing your mind on that. Of course, the statue just represents the teaching, so you're doing that so that, because you're the one seeing that statue before you, you're the one who's doing the physical act, and you realize, okay, putting all that away, I'm going to focus on this. So it's just a way to refocus your attention, and it's about you.
So the aesthetic quality or the lack of aesthetic quality to that is really not that important. It's just that you are semi-kneeling to focus your attention.
Right.